Okay, we are live.
Right.
Fantastic. Okay. Good morning, and thank you for joining us on this Facebook Live Zoom event. We have a remarkable panel this morning to discuss donation and transplantation in diverse communities. We are here today as a part of National Minority Donor Awareness Month, which aims to bring heightened awareness to donation and transplant in multicultural communities. One of the key tenets of this observance is providing education about organ and tissue donation and transplantation. Today's town hall is sponsored by Mid-America Transplant, an organization that works every day to empower others to save and heal lives through donation. The organization is committed to ensuring donation and transplantation are accessible to everyone in our community, regardless of race, zip code, or income, and is dedicated to increasing awareness for this important topic. More than 1,000 people in our region are waiting for a life-saving transplant today, with nearly 40% representing multicultural communities. They're our neighbors, coworkers, family, and friends. And they're waiting for a life-saving call that can only happen because someone else said yes to organ and tissue donation. This morning's panelists are primed to deliver. On behalf of Mid-America Transplant, I want to thank our panelists, Senator Belt, Representative Greenwood, Dr. Henry Randall, Dr. Ross, Connie Boatman-Tate, Director of Life Goes On program for the Illinois Secretary of State's office, Pastor Ron, and Nikki, who's received a kidney pancreas transplant. Thank you to all of our panelists for sharing their stories, voices, and expertise for this important conversation. And to everyone watching, thank you for joining us. I hope you find our time together informative and inspiring. Now to pass it off to Senator Belt and Representative Greenwood.
So good morning. Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. I am so excited to be on this event. As stated earlier, my name is Chris Belt. I'm state senator for the 57th district. And now to my representative, LaToya Greenwood.
I'm LaToya Greenwood, and I am state representative for the 114th district. And we will be introducing our panelists this morning. We have Dr. Henry Randall. He's the Division Chief Surgical Director with SSM, St. Louis University Hospital Abdominal Transplant Center. And he's a member of the Mid-America Transplant Governing Board of Directors.
Next, we have Dr. Will Ross, MD, MPH of Medicine, Division of Nephrology, member of the Mid-America Transplant Foundation and Board of Directors.
We have Nikki Love-McIntyre, who's a kidney pancreas recipient, and we will definitely hear from Nikki later, and she'll talk to us about her and share her donor story with us.
We have Pastor Ron A. Young, Impact Life Church. He's going to speak to his thoughts on organ donations and to the congregations at large.
Connie Boatman-Tate, who's with us this morning, and she'll talk about the fantastic programs and provide us with some great news and statistics and facts about minority donations in Illinois.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much. I would love to hear from our doctors, just to speak to your experience and what you've been doing with Mid-America, and just to talk more about where we're at with organ donation and sort of give a rundown of our basics.
Well, I'll go ahead and start. I probably have the longest tenure with Mid-America Transplant. I'm Dr. Will Ross. I'm a professor of medicine and the Division of Nephrology at Washington University. I started my fellowship in 1987. And one of the first things I did was walk down into our dialysis unit, criminal dialysis unit. I should not have been surprised, but I did note that about 70 to 80% of that patients were African-American in that dialysis unit. That really struck me. And what struck me even more was during that time, we had really relatively high mortality rates in dialysis. Almost 20% of patients would die in their first year. And so we were seeing a disproportionate number of patients on dialysis of color, and we were seeing disproportionate deaths among patients. And so while I was surrounded with my attending at that time, I said, well, we should be sending these patients to get kidney transplants. And that led me to this second observation that the patients weren't as aware, and those who were aware simply didn't have ready access to the information, or even being ready access to being placed on the transplant list. And I began to really worry about that. And that really led me to start a relationship with Mid-America Transplant in 1987. I didn't formally join that board until 1996. But during that time, I felt that we had to really change the narrative, because I kept hearing that patients were not considering transplant because they were suspicious, distrustful of providers, and they simply didn't follow up. And that narrative really put the onus on the patient, rather than the fact that these patients were discriminated against. They were subject to bias within the medical system, and due to some inherent issues of structural racism, leading to their being worrying about these social and structural determinants of health, access to transportation and healthcare. That led to the high rates of diabetes and high blood pressure, and thus kidney disease, and thus a need for transplantation. So I felt that we had to empower these patients. We had to change the narrative. And since 1995, 96, I've been working with Mid-America Transplant to do just that. And I'm actually pleased with the progress we've made, both locally, and the fact that we've really pushed ourselves to become an industry leader nationally in trying to address the reasons why African Americans and Blacks, Indigenous people of color are less are likely to be transplanted. And so we'll talk about some of the changes that we've made in that time period. But suffice to say, we're seeing movement. Now we still have a significant number of people who are dying on the waiting list. If we can move African Americans. To this day, 20 people a day will die of waiting for a transplant. And so there's clearly a need to move this information out into the community even more so, which is why I appreciate this forum to do just that. Thank you.
Dr. Ross, thanks for your comments. And I want to echo that, but first, just a little bit about me. I'm a professor of surgery at SSM Health, St. Louis University Hospital. I'm also what's called the executive director of our transplant center, which means I have dominion over the entire transplant program. So I've been here about 5 years in the St. Louis community now, and sought to have involvement with Mid-America Transplant from the time that I hit the ground here in this area. One thing I want to focus on early, and this can be talked about through the entirety of this webinar, is the three focuses actually of donor awareness is not just to encourage people to register for donation and provide the education, but also one of the basic tenets is to promote healthy living and disease prevention. You know, as they say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So, although the need for transplant or transplantation in donors is pretty ominous and onerous, we also have to focus somewhat on healthy living and the tenets of healthy living, so that people don't move towards what we call end-stage liver disease for liver transplantation, or end-stage kidney disease, in which you end up on dialysis and need a transplant. So, if we could keep those points in mind, I think we can, again, focus on these points of education across that spectrum.
Thank you so much for that. No, that's incredibly interesting, especially when you're talking about prevention in the community and the steps that we need to take in order to do that. And I know that we can sort of hear from Senator Belt and Nikki Love in terms of like how your lifestyle's changed or anything like that in terms of like receiving a donation and whatnot. And I know that we will absolutely get to that. But thank you so much for that. So can we move to Ms. Boatman-Tate? What would you like to offer about what's happening in Illinois in terms of minority organ donation and awareness?
Thank you for that. So first and foremost, I'm delighted to be here. I think this is such an important opportunity to share such a relative message about organ and tissue donation, transplantation, and minority participation. You know, I'm just overwhelmed with joy to be able to actually sit in this forum and have this conversation. I bring greetings to you all from Secretary Jesse White. So I kind of just want to create a framework in what we're discussing. And so, you know, here in Illinois, we're still, you know, on a high celebrating our monumental milestone of reaching 7 million registered donors here in Illinois. But to kind of create a framework of what we're talking about, you know, there's an apparatus of responsibility to make transplantation happen, right? And so we have so many different players, as you all can see. And so if I'm able to just kind of create a pathway for, you know, an everyday individual to understand how we all work in tandem to make sure transplantation occurs. So you have an organization like the Secretary of State's office, Life Goes On. And so we serve on the forefront, making sure that we're out here, you know, leading the charge to talk to the communities and have a conversation that promotes registration, right? So we're out here registering individuals every single day for this life-saving mission. We work to make organ and tissue donation a social norm because it is very macabre for some individuals, right? They see organ and tissue donation as death, and I see it as life. So, you know, it's very important. We have a very important mission. You have individuals such as, you know, Dr. Randall and Dr. Ross, who, you know, they're the nephrologists, and they have responsibilities to ensure that individuals who are qualified candidates facing end-stage, you know, failure, whether it be liver or renal failure, are added to the transplant waiting list. That's a responsibility of the nephrologist, right? And as Dr. Ross kind of alluded to, or quite frankly just said, you know, there had been discrimination in the past. And so, you know, it's awesome to have individuals such as Dr. Ross and Dr. Randall on the forefronts, making sure those individuals who are qualified are added to that list. And then you have the OPOs like Mid-America Transplant and Gift of Hope, who are responsible for the evaluation and the recovery of organs. They transplant those organs. They're responsible, they have a responsibility, and they do a wonderful job with regards to donor family support. And then we move forth and you have those governmental entities like CMS, who are responsible for funding, and they're responsible for regulations. And then you have those like UNOS, who's responsible for making sure that organs are transplanted in an equitable manner. So I hope that creates a framework, because I know for many people, you know, we receive questions all the time on how does it really work? What does it mean? What happens after I register? What happens? You know, what's the processes? And so these are the players in part that make sure transplantation occurs. In Illinois, you know, we have a number of programs, and if you want me to get back into that, you know, as we move forward, I can. But, you know, I just kind of wanted to create that framework before we move on any further.
No, that's absolutely perfect. I think that really like leads us in to just our first question, or sort of something I can pose. So who can donate? Who is eligible to donate? What does it mean to sign up for the donor registry? What does that look like?
So I'd like to clarify the differences in donation. That's another dynamic that I think we have a responsibility in clarifying. So there are three components of donation. You can be a cadaveric donor, which means you are donating to help save and restore lives. You can be a living donor, which also means you're helping to save or restore someone's life. Or we have whole body donation. I believe all of us here on this panel, we focus primarily on cadaveric donation. Whole body donation speaks to medical research and, the advancements of medicine. So, I like to say, and I'll, defer to one of the doctors, anybody's eligible to register, right? They make that decision, the transplant or the OPOs make that decision at the time of recovery or at the time of transition. But we don't discriminate in who can register to be a donor. Would one of the doctors like to speak to who can donate?
Yeah, so a little bit, kind of want to back up a little bit. We're talking about organ donation, but I'd like to put a little framework around why donation is so important. So I always, whenever I give talks, I always pull up the most up-to-date data for people who are in need of an organ transplant. So as of 10:46 this morning, there are 109,000 people nationally on the wait list awaiting some sort of life-saving organ. So whether that's a kidney, you're in need of a kidney, a liver, heart, lungs, that's an extremely large number. So if you're trying to figure out or make some sense of why we're having this conversation, it's because there are almost 110,000 people in the United States currently who are in need of an organ for transplant. So just at least wanted to put that framework up there. Secondly, who can donate once you've registered? We talked about, or it was mentioned about the difference between being a cadaver donor or what we call a brain dead or deceased donor. That's someone who has unfortunately had an accident occur, whether it's a traumatic accident like a motor vehicle accident or a brain aneurysm, a bleed in the brain, or some other unfortunate occurrence. Those people will never recover brain function. So you can do what's called first person consent, where you've already registered before this event occurred. And you can also have this discussion, which is one of the points we talk about, education, letting your family know that you want to donate your organs as a steward of benevolence and being a part of the humankind, where you want to share a gift with another family in the unfortunate incident that some unfortunate occurrence takes place in your life or a family member's life. So just again, putting a little bit of framework around that. And the organ bank will work with families and talk about what are the contraindications to donation. We at the transplant centers, Dr. Ross will tell you, and we review patients as candidates, recipients. We have an absolute contraindication for recipients. Likewise, the same occurs for donors. There are people who can't donate. People, for instance, with some active cancers can't donate. So we have a list of who can donate, who can't donate, and what are the exclusionary criteria for actual donors.
Only thing I would add to what Dr. Randall said was that a donation is within the cadaveric deceased donor pool, but also as African Americans, we have the opportunity to do this gift of life in a living, through a living donation. I have patients who walk around with kidneys that were donated by their loved ones or even wonderful friends. And we should be aware that we can do this. We can make this donation, particularly of a kidney or partial liver, and still maintain a completely healthy, long lifespan. We should, again, be cognizant of the ability to make that gift while we're here, while we're alive.
All right. And to extend Dr. Ross's comments, living donation and the registry are not one and the same. So when you're registering for cadaveric or brain death donation. If you want to offer yourself as a living donor, that then falls under the purview of the respective transplant centers. So Dr. Ross, may have patients on his list, and family members or friends want to donate to someone either on their list or again, to a family or friend. That's done through the respective transplant centers. That's not part of the registry that we're talking about here. So also want to make that clear. Registering under the state registration pathway is different from living donation through the respective transplant centers.
Yeah, and additionally, I'd like to add, so as Dr. Randall pointed out those national numbers, let's dive a little deeper into that. So if we are talking about from a national standpoint, right, we have about 63% of the nation. There's about 330 million US residents. And of those, about 63% represents the Caucasian population. You have about 15% representing Latino or Hispanic population, and then 13% that represents the Black or African American community, and 6% representing Asian. What's daunting about those numbers is that African Americans still rate higher in need of a kidney transplant than anyone else, any other ethnic group in the nation. That's pretty alarming, and that's why we're having this conversation today.
Yes, appreciate you saying that. African Americans, we're twice as likely to develop high blood pressure, twice as likely to develop diabetes, and when we have those chronic diseases, we're 3 times more likely to develop advanced stage kidney disease requiring dialysis or transplantation. And as I said in my earlier remarks, remember the mortality rates, because we're disproportionately represented in dialysis, we're also going to be disproportionately represented in the number of patients who die awaiting a transplantation.
Absolutely. Those are some daunting numbers. And I think that you guys really frame that and sort of put that into perspective. I know thinking about that now, I can't even imagine, but something that we have to talk about too, what is the hesitation? I know, and I want to pose this question essentially to everyone, because we are all here because this is something that we believe in. We want to push people to join these donor registries. We want to make this conversation something that isn't scary to talk about and every day. And I know that that's one of those things that there is a hesitation to sign up. And that's something that we have seen. We have that data available to us. We know that there are issues that are posed. Do you think it's just education? Is it something personal? I know too, and maybe Pastor Ron can speak on this. Do you think people have conflicts with their religion or how they see donation or how they feel about it? How do you guys feel about that?
All of that.
Yeah, I would say all of the above. But I would like to hear from Pastor Young, from his perspective, on what he hears from congregants and what they feel about donations.
Man, that's a very good question, especially dealing with 2 types of people within a congregation. Generally, when you have a congregation like the one that I serve, you have younger and older generation, right? So the older generation usually need to be a recipient, and then the younger are kind of like the ones who have the ability to give at a more, I guess, generally a more healthy functioning rate. But the lack of information and knowledge on both ends, I think it starts there, spiritually and practically, about what does it mean to be a donor. And I also think from our perspective of a congregation, and our congregation personally is a majority African-American congregation, I think it's kind of taboo as well. That it's something that we just don't really talk about, seeing as that we have so many layers to an onion before we even, start to discuss organ donation. You want me to talk about organ donor, and I don't even have insurance. I don't have money to pay. And so this is the kind of congregation that most of us serve, who serve in impoverished areas. And the information that we did receive, right, about organ donor, I think it's such a caricature that this exaggeration from what do the doctors really do to conspiracy theorists of don't go to the hospital because all they want is your organs, to, well, when Jesus raises me from the dead, where is my organs going to be, right? And then just the practical application of the emotional stress, the psychological stress. I don't want my son or my daughter who passed away, who was, overall healthy. I want their bodies to be intact because I want to preserve them. And I don't think our community talks about it enough, let alone in church. And so to hear these numbers that Ms. Boatman put out, and Dr. Ross and Dr. Randall, about our population of people versus the amount that we need, I think churches, if we are more informed, then we can inform our families, and we have to do that at a grassroots effort so that the African-American community won't be afraid, it won't be taboo, it will be something that we're willing to engage in. I know many years ago, I decided to become a donor. And someone asked me, and then I'll pass it on, well, Pastor, as a Christian, doesn't like when I die, doesn't Jesus need all of my body parts, right? And I'm like, wait, you're the same person who believes that he created us from the dust of the earth. God does not need what you had to do what he's going to do. And I think we have this misconception. The same with cremation. If I go in, I'm gonna be, well, you came from dust, right? And I think we have a lot of misconception about what it looks like. And some of it is just, we are afraid of the unknown. And we're not looking at a bigger picture. If I give as a donor who's brain dead, right? Do you really think that person is concerned about what's going on with their body at that point? But the emotional and psychological stress from the person won't allow us to proceed to help, as Dr. Ross said, give a gift of life to someone else. So I think, in short, our congregations aren't informed enough. We don't talk about it enough in our communities. And ultimately, we have so many other systematic issues that organ donating and an impoverished, and I use that, community, it's not high on their priority list or ours. And we get to change that narrative with conversations like this.
Can I say amen to Pastor?
Yeah.
Amen, Pastor. And I think that those of us in this field need to understand that, and we have to adopt a different way of thinking when we approach families. And not only did Pastor Young state that so well, we need to go further and think about the cumulative trauma and stress that our community feels. And we have to use what's called a trauma-informed approach. We have to assume that our families, our communities have been so overwhelmed with stresses, cumulative stresses over so many years, that they have this hierarchy of needs, and transplantation may not be there in the hierarchy of needs. We have to understand that going in there. And we have to state that explicitly, that we know what you're going through. We have to have that culture of humility to make that abundantly clear, which is why the Mid-America Transplant, years ago, we really started looking at the role of having ethically similar role messages going in, and cultural relevant materials developed to really go in and ensure that we understand what the community is going through. Without that, then the pastor said it so well. We're going to be behind the eight ball.
And look, can I just kind of piggyback off what Dr. Ross said? I think also too, one of the things is we don't understand the importance of a thing until we need a thing. Yeah. And until it hits home, when it's grandmama, right, that needs it, then we want to take the proverbial bull by the horns and say, this is what we need to do. When actually, if we become proactive instead of retroactive in these issues, because a lot of times it's not a if, it's a when do you know someone who's going to need organ donor. And I think that if we really just open our eyes and create more forums like this, we will be more prone to make the adjustment in our community before we need to have to do it and understand the importance. So it's one of those things where we don't want to have to learn by experience, but just from observation of community, how can we engage it? And not to make this about African Americans, because I mean, there are other minorities, but we get to save our own people. Yeah. But we have to be able to look at it from a different paradigm.
Yeah. Can I add something? You talked about conspiracy theories. So one of the myths that I want to dispel is people think or have the assumption that if they're involved in an automobile accident or something traumatic happens to them, that healthcare providers will just let them die because there's a conspiracy between transplant centers and trauma centers and transplant surgeons like myself and trauma surgeons, that somehow people are colluding to allow them to die so that their organs can be taken. There's nothing that's further from the truth. I don't look good in orange, and most other doctors don't. So that kind of collusion will land you in jail, and it will cause such an uproar in the healthcare system, the regulatory bodies, that they will shut hospitals down because of that. So I want to dispel that myth. There's no connection between a person arriving at a hospital and needing care and then succumbing to their disease, and then that transition directly over to transplantation. There's a complete separation between those two bodies and those two entities, so that there is no untoward activity going on, if you get what I'm saying. So.
And can I just add something to that point, which is why I really tip my hat to all of you who are in this field, because not only are you fighting, there's a segment within our community that's really woke, right? And part of that really woke segment disseminates misinformation.
Yes.
Like you just said. So here's why I tip my hat to a Dr. Ross and a Connie and Dr. Randall and all of you who are participating, because not only are you fighting against misinformation, you're also fighting against no information. And so now you have a double whammy on top of all of the other things that our culture deals with that has pushed that to the forefront. So we don't know what to believe, we don't know how to believe it, and we're not hearing the right information from experts, but we're hearing it from people who think they know, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for that. Can I just say this? I'm so enjoying these conversations because these are some of the issues that we face on a daily basis. My team and I, when we're out here working to register individuals. Let me say, I was raised in a disenfranchised community, right? I knew nothing about organ and tissue donation until I was in my mid-20s. Okay, I knew nothing about the concept, the idea of organ and tissue donation. We didn't hear that. And like Pastor Ron said, there were so many other issues regarding survival, right? That transplantation, we didn't have anyone coming into the communities talking about organ and tissue donation. Recently, I had a young lady, and I happened to ask her, what her age was. She was 28 years old. She knew nothing about organ and tissue donation. And so, that just, I would say the preface of limitations in part to registration is lack of knowledge. It's fear and it's lack of information. And it's also these false narratives that are being, communicated, not just, from our grandparents and, our loved ones, not just from individuals who don't know anything about organ and tissue donation. It's just what they assume, but it's also being propagated in television. You have these television shows and these movies, around these, horrific things that occur. I've heard, oh, if I sign up, to become, somebody's going to be calling me, or, there's going to be a van driving down my street and they're going to, blindfold me and throw me into the van and take you, and so it's so many different dynamics that we are working to debunk, and it's a team effort. I don't think any one of us can do it alone and without the support of the other.
Let me jump in.
Okay.
I just want to say this really quickly. Everything that we're saying is true. Being African American, we come from a tradition of oral tradition. Stories are passed down. And part of the issue with us, two issues, three. Number one, we don't ever get to see doctors that look like us. And so Dr. Ross and Dr. Randall, my nephrologist wasn't an African American. It was someone of East Asian descent. The second thing is, with this oral tradition that we have that's so pervasive in our communities, stories are passed down from great grandmama to grandmama, and so forth and so on. So the distrust and that we have in the medical community stems from years and years of things that were done to us as Black folks. The Tuskegee experiment. My mom, my dad's mom knew about that. She was alive, and she this, that, and the other, and they tell those stories, and so it becomes fact that you cannot trust the medical profession. And lastly, we're all on here. We're African American, and the vast majority of us have been told, do not tell what's going on in my house. And so all these things are like a recipe, and you stir them around, and ultimately you have what we have. So we have to re-educate. And we have to really, as Pastor Young said, we have to be proactive. Here I was, a college degree guy. I was, the first in my family. Hey, I'm on it, and didn't know anything, until it came knocking at my door. And then my whole family got ready and got the knowledge of what needed to be done here and there and here and there. But as Connie stated, you don't know about this stuff. You coming from the communities we come from, you just don't know. And you can't do anything about it if you don't know. So what does that say? Churches, the places where we have refuge, the places where we have the pastor, when the pastor says something, it becomes priority to the congregants. We have to start there. These Greek organizations, we have to start there. If we believe in the new concept of the talented 10th, of W.E.B. Du Bois pulling up to 90%, well, it starts there. And so we can't wait. We have to go and educate because we have catching up to do. It's funny, when I was going through my ordeal, I had Caucasian after Caucasian, whether it was male or female, come up to me and say, hey, I'll go get tested for you. But conversely, my friends, 20-some years, fraternity brothers, ain't offered me nothing. And it ain't because they were being selfish, they just didn't know, right? They really fell into the mindset of, I got to keep everything I got, right? Because I may, if you take my kidney, I may die. Or if you date, this, that, and the other. So we just have to educate, really be, this is why this is important. I think the images of you two, we have to expand the base and let people know you're out there. A Black nephrologist, what?
Yes.
That's crazy to me. 1996, I didn't know anything about you, because it really means something. And so I'll leave it there and I'll let the representative speak, and we'll come back later.
Well, I just wanted to speak on the same thing with Dr. Ross and Randall. I mean, what an honor to share a panel with both of you. and the Secretary of State, Connie doing a tremendous job, Mid-America. But for us being legislators, it really is about providing resources and educating our constituents. And so we were honored to be able to host this forum, this conversation today, to bring awareness to an issue that really impacts all of us, whether we have been directly impacted or not. And it, at the end of the day, it continues to go back to education and resources. And so we will continue to partner with Mid-America. We will continue to reach out and develop that relationship with Connie, with the Secretary of State's office, continue to work with Pastor Ron and all of our pastors in the area about sharing information. And I look forward to continuing conversations with Dr. Randall and Dr. Ross in just how we can continue to educate Black people about health issues and health disparities in general. So I am just amazed to be here today. I thank everybody on this panel, and we can continue to move forward with the conversation. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Nikki, I know that you also have a great story and you do a lot of work in the community. A lot of our viewers have actually requested to hear the stories. So I kind of want to push it over to you and just for you to speak to your experience, how it was, how you approached it, and especially to any of those difficult conversations to have. Because I know kind of what we're hearing across the board, that it's something that people don't know about until they need it. And just approaching that, I can imagine that it must be so daunting. So if you want to take it away.
Okay, and thank you again so much for having me. This is a very much needed conversation. I was diagnosed with chronic kidney disease, and something that Dr. Randall touched on about preventative. I was an insulin dependent diabetic for 20 plus years, and that just took a toll on my kidneys. And I think one of the things, me being a diabetic, I knew all the diabetic stuff, I had it down, but I did not know that it was something that could lead to chronic kidney disease, hence transplantation. I was having issues, went to the doctor. The doctor was just basically like, I had got some lab work done. You need to go to the nephrologist immediately. I went to the nephrologist and I was diagnosed with chronic kidney disease stage 3. A month later, it had progressed to stage 4. At that point, my nephrologist basically, he said, okay, dialysis is something that's going to be coming up, but his focus at that point was transplant. That is the number one option that he took me to. And his rationale for that was because besides the diabetes and things going on kind of with that, everything else, I was pretty healthy. So he referred me to the transplant center, and my actual first meeting was with Dr. Randall. I went to SSM Health St. Louis University Hospital and I spoke with Dr. Randall, and we talked at length. And it basically was, we need to cure the problem, which was diabetes, hence the pancreas transplant. And of course, my kidneys, weren't working. So I was able to get a kidney and pancreas transplant. That was in 2015. One thing I like to tell people, I do a lot of speaking in the community as well. I have personally been a registered organ donor since the day I turned 16. And I lived in Illinois. So when you go to the driver's license, when you go get your driver's license, they ask you, would you like to register to be an organ donor? And as some people touched on, it was something that was not talked about in my household. And it was something that I didn't know anything about, but I just remember thinking, I can't take it with me. So sure, I'll sign up. And I have been one ever since, not knowing that years later, you know, these same organs that I was willing to donate to someone, if that situation arose, I would need those. Um, but it's not something that is talked about in our community. My family, I think for a lot of people, you have to see someone that's going through it. And when you see someone that's going through it, or you know someone, then that kind of changes their mindset on being a registered organ donor. Um, I was luckily able to receive my transplant before I had to go on dialysis. And when I went to go talk to, and I'm not your regular case, and I'm sure Dr. Randall will tell you that, but when I went to see him, because of needing the dual organs, he said, you'll receive organs within 3 months. And I was actually transplanted on October the 18th, 2015. So I'm coming up on a 5-year anniversary, and it was a, it was a tough road at first. That first 30 days, I was in the hospital 25 of those days. I had a lot going on. They had to get things leveled off and get me where I needed to be. I was weak and just kind of sick. But I mean, what do you expect for someone that's had a major surgery like that, organ transplant? Before transplant, I had no energy. I was a severe anemic. I stayed in the infusion center getting iron transfusions. I fortunately was able to continue working, but it took everything within me to be able to get up in the morning and get dressed and get to work, because you're so exhausted from everything that's going on. And the diabetes and the kidney disease has started wreaking havoc on my body. It seems like once I got the diagnosis that I had kidney disease, it just kind of started doing everything to every part of my body. All kinds of stuff was happening and going on. And you're sick, you're on the transplant list, you're waiting for these organs that you have no control over. You don't know when they'll come. And it's, you're waiting on it to save your life, but also when by receiving it, you know that someone has lost their life. But you're waiting, and if people are not signing up to be registered organ donors, you're just waiting. Luckily, I was able to receive my organs. I did receive them from a 23-year-old young man from the St. Louis area who, unbeknownst to his family, had signed up to be a registered organ donor. And luckily, they did honor his wishes. Um, and by the grace of God and my doctors and my donor, I'm here today. And I talk to people, and I also pose to them, what if this was what if I could be your daughter? I could be your mother, possibly, your sister, your favorite aunt. What if this happened to them? You know, you don't want to see them sick. You don't want to see them die waiting on organs that are not available. And when I talk to people, I just tell them, think about that. And I tell them my story, and I tell them kind of what I went through. And it just kind of gets them thinking. And, you know, I just ask them, just think about it. If you would like to sign up to be a registered donor, because you never know what the future holds. And when they kind of personalize it like that, I think they take it better, and it kind of pushes them more towards registering to be a donor.
Wow, that was honestly, thank you so much, Nikki. That story was very moving. I know the way that you pose that makes us all really think about how we would approach these topics and come to this conversation. And I keep thinking about like how lucky that young man's family honored his wishes, even though he did sign up and they weren't aware of that. So that's honestly, that's amazing. Thank you so much.
Yes, and if it is something that you do decide to be a registered donor, have that conversation with your family. Let them know what your wishes are. You know, my family knows even before this situation came about with me. My mom knows I'm a registered donor, and you know, if anything were to happen to me, these are my wishes and this is what to do. It's a conversation that needs to be had in the church, in the community, um, just everywhere, basically.
And Nikki, I'm glad to see you doing well, and I'm excited to have heard your testimony. I think it's a beautiful thing. Bless you, sister. That is very powerful and
Thank you so
encouraging.
much.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I also think that, Nikki, that was just an incredible story. And I appreciate what you're saying about having this conversation. When we have the conversation and someone is in the hospital, obviously that's too late. We have to have this conversation when kids are growing up. To have a a curricular element that's actually embedded in our public schools. We need to have a curricular element that's embedded in how we train physicians and nurses. And thank goodness Mid-America Transplant is also on the forefront of helping to develop that curriculum, particularly in the nursing schools. But we need to go further upstream and make sure that our schools are discussing not transplantation from the sense of someone's going to die, but what are the organs you have? I mean, what happens? How can an organ be moved from one person to another? It is science, and it's informative, and there are school systems that have actually incorporated that. We need to move more aggressively in incorporating a curriculum. Again, Mid-America Transplant certainly is on the forefront, but pushing this further so that we don't have to wait until someone's near the end of a chronic disease before they even hear about transplantation. So Nikki, thank you for sharing your story.
And one thing, Mid-America Transplant, that I love that they do is that they have schools to come in, groups of students from schools, and they talk about, the organs that are able to be donated and the donation process and things, and talk to them about, once you're of age, if this is a road that you decide to take, what you need to do.
Right.
So, and what Nikki just said is something I was just thinking about, like, and I know that you all are already doing, this to whatever degree and level, but how do we not only further grassroots the conversation, but especially in our communities, how do we make that conversation attractive? Because even though information is important, it doesn't mean I'm gonna be drawn in to hear what that information is just because it's important. But how do we make this conversation attractive to our community to want to engage it so that we can grassroot it?
So
Well-
I'd like to get into some of our programs and what we're doing here. But before I get into that, I would really like to hear, Senator Belt's story. And before that, Nikki, I just want to say congratulations on your gift.
Thank you.
Shared an awesome story. Wow, I appreciate the manner in which you shared it, and thank you for being so selfless in sharing that. But I'd also like to hear Senator Belt's story and how you were impacted by transplantation.
Okay, so with me, mine started in '96. My brother was in a house fire. I ran in the house to get him out. He got out. I think I was 17% of my body got burned in the process. So while I'm in the burn unit of the hospital, they come in and tell me my kidneys had my urine had creatinine in it. And so my kidneys were failing. And so I'm trying to process all this, being burnt, and I'm 24 years old, and now my kidneys are failing. So they tell me when I get out the burn unit, go see a nephrologist. And so I do that. And so I started that process in '96. So from '96 to 2009, we fought the good fight. I was hitting my benchmark, my potassium levels, my water, my liquid intakes. I'm doing everything I was supposed to do. And then in 2009, I had to we just couldn't stretch it any further. So I started dialysis, did a year on dialysis, blessed. I only was on there for a year. And in that year, I was secondary twice and then primary once. So it went, I was blessed. But the dialysis experience is one I'll never forget. I used to watch the tube and my blood go out the tube to get cleaned, and I was on the machine 5 hours, Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. At times they would take off too much fluid and I would cramp really, really bad. I passed out one time because of the fluid that they took off. I remember, to me, I had to fight it. So I drove myself to dialysis. I kept my job. I did everything. I kept working out. I would go to the gym. I had to do everything that I did prior to dialysis for me. And so I fought the fight. I just remember whenever I would make it home, my family would have the temperature on 90 because I was cold, and I would get under blankets even when the house was 90 degrees. Because, you know, having your blood removed and cleaned and put back in your body, you get cold. I remember the dialysis face, and my skin got darker and my eyes got redder over that time, more red over that time. And so, but there again, in a year, January 24th, 2010, January 23rd, I got a call at about 2, 3 in the morning, which is so strange because I don't answer the phone at 2, 3 in the morning, particularly an unknown, because it showed up as unknown. I answered it. They say, hey, you need to get over here right away. I'm 10 minutes away from Barnes Jewish Hospital. I live in Cahokia. I was over there. They prepped me. The next morning, I remember watching, it's so vivid. I remember watching, it was the NFC Championship game, Brett Favre and the Minnesota Vikings versus New Orleans Saints. I remember taking the volume. They prepped me, and next thing I know, it was done. It was over. 2 days later, they sent me home. And so it's just been a blessing for me. And to kind of touch upon what we were talking about all together, Black folk and our particular existence in this country. When I first got the transplant, I wouldn't tell anybody. I'm like, no, it's none of their business, yada, yada, yada. But to speak on what you were asking the question about, Pastor Ron, how do you engage people? How do you get them to do it? People like me, people like Nikki. If once we tell our story, and once it becomes personal, and once you see me, and once you see Nikki, and once you hear our story, you know, I wasn't a donor on my driver's license until that happened. And, you know, my family, my immediate family, all my dad's 83 years old. He's a donor on his card. And so, you know, that's how it happens. And since then, I'll share it. I'm in the General Assembly. I'm in the Senate. They know that I'm a donor. They know I'm a transplant recipient, and any bills that come my way, and if it has something to do with dialysis, kidney, I'm on a kidney transplant committee task force, looking into these very issues that we're talking about today. We're going to champion those things. We're going to fight for those things. Who better to have on the Senate floor than in the fight for issues like that than somebody that's been through it? So I just think this is all part of my cause, my purpose is to be in this place at this time. You talk about from a fire to kidney failure to the Senate. I'm here for a reason, and we got to push and fight on. So that's it in a nutshell.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you.
And so, Connie, I'll be working with you. We'll be working together.
Awesome. I'm here for it. And thank you so much for sharing that story. That's amazing. I mean, and if you think about it, I mean, no two stories are the same. I mean, everybody's pathway to needing transplantation is very different. And so congratulations, Senator, on your gift as well. I will say, in speaking to Pastor Ron, in terms of what kind of programs are out there, right? How are we out here and how are we communicating with the public? And so here in Illinois, we have, and I'm excited to say again, 7 million individuals registered. But if we unpack those numbers, I think over the past I'd say 5-6 years, we've seen some, illumination being, organ and tissue donation being, shown in the most positive light, I will say, as far as my experience goes, right? There's some illumination there. And so if we look at those numbers in 2014, we had 85 cadaveric donors, and that's African-American cadaveric donors. In 2019, it was 122, right? And so in 2014, there were 46 Hispanic cadaveric donors, and in 2019, 63. In 2014, there were 8 Asian donors, and in 2019, there were 16. So there's some growth, but it's not enough, right? It's just not enough. We have more than 4,000 individuals waiting on the transplant list here in Illinois. And so what are we doing? How are we getting out into these communities? And so, one of the ways, well, several of the ways we're able to do that is, we have a dynamic powerhouse. Our Secretary of State, Jesse White, is our champion among champions when it comes to organ and tissue donation. You cannot talk about organ and tissue donation here in Illinois and not equate that with Secretary White, right? That has been his passion for over 2 decades. And so I'm very honored to serve in the capacity that I do under his leadership. And we have cornerstone programs that are in place to communicate with individuals of all walks of life and from every age group. We have a poster contest, which is a K through 12, right? And so we're planting those seeds early, right? We're giving them an opportunity to learn and express their thoughts about organ and tissue donation from a very early age. We have in April, Secretary, he's making sure that he's doing a statewide tour. Maybe we'll make it to you, Pastor Ron, in the very near future, but he does.
I hope so.
Statewide tour with the churches, encouraging our faith-based leaders to have these conversations with their congregation about the importance of being someone's hero and helping to save and restore life, right? We also have a minority awareness. We are in our 8th annual year of having what's called Wave Away the Wait. And that's our minority awareness push that we do. It's held in front of the Thompson Center every August. Unfortunately, we weren't able to do that this year due to Corona, but we took it online. So we had a virtual campaign that we launched, and there are plenty of views that within Illinois and otherwise, and so that was great. And just making that awareness known and talking about how organ and tissue donation and transplantation is impacting the minority communities, and so that's in August. And in that event, it's so well attended. It's such a feel-good event in that we have about 30 vendors, right, that participate. We have participation from our procurement organizations, that's Mid-America Transplant and Gift of Hope and our other Donate Life partners who all come on board to make sure that that's a successful event. And it's just wonderful. And then in November, we have what's called National Donor Sabbath. And that's where we're going out into the churches again and talking to the faith leaders. And so it's constant initiatives like that we're working to create and to fortify and to, push that conversation to make organ and tissue donation a social norm. I said that before, I'll say it again. It's really about educating, debunking these myths out here, working with our community partners, our elected officials, and our transplant centers and other partners to make this all happen. And again, organ and tissue donation, transplantation, it is not a conversation about death. It's a conversation about restoration and life.
True.
Well, thank you so much for that, Connie. And thank you to all of our panelists today. Thank you, Ms. Nikki, for sharing your story. It was a tremendous story, and we really appreciate it. Thank you to all of our outstanding panelists today. Senator Bell, do you have anything to add as we close it out?
I would just simply say this. I don't know if it was Dr. Ross or Dr. Randall, but one of them, if not both, touched upon it. We need to come back and do a follow-up. But this
Absolutely.
time we need to talk about things to keep you from getting on that list, and we need to talk about what we put in our bodies, because we are what we eat, and we know that soul food will kill you. And so we need to start having these discussions about how do we prevent people from ending up on these lists. It was hypertension for me. I know, Nikki, it was diabetes for you. So let's just keep that out there and see if we can reconvene at a later date to continue to have ongoing dialogue. So this was awesome, and God bless each and every one of them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much to the panelists. If anyone has any final remarks, anything that they want to add, I know that Mid-America is going to work with our panelists and with our doctors and with our faith leaders, our storytellers, everyone that's involved. Thank you so much, Ms. Boatman-Tate, Senator, Representative, Pastor Young. These conversations are so important. And moving forward, I know that we're always open to answering questions, providing follow-up. Mid-America prides himself on keeping that open dialogue. There shouldn't be any secrecy behind this. This should be something that we can come out and talk about in the open and discuss more often than we do already, and even beyond Minority Donor Awareness Month. I feel like this is a every month conversation. So absolutely, thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you for having me and being able to learn more from those who are much smarter than I am.
Yes, I know the doctors gave us all of that, but yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone.
Happy
Thank
Saturday.
you.
Have a nice day.